Okay, this next piece I don't have a title for. It's multimedia. There's a photograph that he has actually sewn onto the background paper. It's pastels, pencil. Here's the actual stitch work. Print work there. And then we have an actual bat skeleton. So Mitch was a poet also. All the writing that you'll see on his work is his. He also loved mythology and physics and felt that art, religion, and science could only exist intertwined. They were inseparable. And I have the math background, maybe about 4th or 5th grade math, and then I go, bloop, what? He was really into, I remember, like chaos theory, and here, chaos. No accidents. She said there are no accidents, only frantic movements and dances with careless effect, shifting, always between notes played on quantum strings. Quantum physics, chaos theory, the overly simplified, condensed version that a butterfly flapping its wings in one state can cause a hurricane 300 miles away. I also think that this is a theme that we'll see in a lot of his work, is this stitched, the soul stitched together like the limbs of a rag doll. And obviously, if we know the backstory of Batman, we know that Bruce Wayne's parents were murdered on a street right in front of him as a young child. And obviously that is not anything that happened that Mitch could relate to directly in our lives. But I can see some kind of a parallel between, here's his mother's pearl necklace, Bruce Wayne's mother's pearl necklace, splattered in her blood, the site from what I assume to be the scope of the killer, the inner demons that then plagued him as a result of this action, the aloneness and solitude that Batman then lived with for the rest of his life, and that turned him into the sentinel that he became. This all the result of the murder of his parents. Mistakes. But I think, so I would say this is sort of like this piece is just sort of a summary of that moment, that everything that was born in that moment of terror, these demons that were born. Mitchell's had these similar demons, but born of a different event. Not an event, actually. I think born of a combination of our environment. We had loving parents, but, no one's perfect, and certainly we all have our stories. And then I think brain chemistry and addiction, but the addiction came late in his life, very late in his life, the last 8 years of his life, 10 years of his life. Prior to that, it was just the chemistry and the inner demons that he dealt with. And I think some of that, I told you he was obsessed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And what that looked like for him as a child was, and I think this again is how his parallel and his understanding of Batman was, Mitchell always worried about losing our parents. From the time he was a little boy, when he'd be left home with a babysitter, he would just panic and go into these sweats and actually become physically ill, that something horrible was going to befall them. And so years and years of that kind of worry, just grooved into his brain. And then as a teenager, when he learned how to drive, for years he would have to drive around the block over and over and over before he would allow himself to park in our driveway. Because an irrational fear or thought popped into his head that what if he had hurt someone while he was driving and he didn't know it? So he'd have to drive around the block to make sure he hadn't hurt someone. So he sort of became hijacked by these irrational fears and phobias. And like I said, highly functional. I don't want to paint the picture of him as someone who was like institutionalized and couldn't hold a job, because that's not the case. He was a teacher for years and years and years, and a wonderful one at that. But these fears and phobias that hijacked him determined how he dealt with other people and how he saw the world. And so when I was talking earlier about the chain, from the time I was a little girl, I'm 9 years younger than Mitch, I was always aware of this chain around his neck, this symbolic chain. And so I would always lash out at anything that caused it to tighten. And in the end, I think I tried to get it off of his neck, and I kind of gave up, and we'll talk about that in another video. Obviously, survivors of suicide deal with all kinds of guilt, should-haves, what-ifs, and I have my fair share of that. But I wasn't able to get the chain off from around his neck. I don't know what this symbol means. If anyone knows, I would love to be enlightened on it. So to close with the Batman series, to simplify his love of Batman as a mere connection to his youth isn't quite right. In a way, Batman is his brother. And these mythological beasts, we'll talk more, and he has a series on Hercules that I'll share with you, and Frankenstein.